Today, we're going to up the level of difficulty a little bit by creating this crane rig with automated controls. Now, really, this is very similar to what we did in the gun turret, where it's a tracking constraint that's used to make it swivel around. But we've got an IK setup on the top. And then we have the action constraint that is automating these opening and closing parts here. The other little bit of a step up is that this whole mesh is one object. So we need to use an armature modifier with deformation bones, with deformation turned on. And at the end, I've also got a UI script that is optional if you want to do that. It's not actually part of it, but it's to kind of extend your learning. Now, with this actual recording of the tutorial, I have sped it up. So it is going in fast, it speeds up and it slows down depending on what I'm doing. But I really want you to focus on what I'm doing. So watch and take notes. And at the end of each step, I pause and let you catch up. So we kind of summarize what I've done in that step. That's so I don't want you to do two things at once by trying to do it and watch at the same time. I really want you to watch, focus, take notes and absorb that, and then you'll get a spot to catch up. So hopefully that extends your learning and makes you learn a lot faster. All right, let's get started. You are going to find it a lot easier to snap your bones when you can see the wireframe. So up in the overlays options, I'm going to enable that wireframe, and then I can snap my bones more effectively. And this first bone here is going to be the root. So now I'm going to rotate that one 90 degrees and scale it up. 2.5 is the value that I chose there. And then in order to place the next bone, I'm going to loop select some loops there. So all of those verts are selected, and then I can snap my cursor to that location and then jump back into the armature and snap the bone to the cursor. But you'll see that I accidentally clicked and moved my cursor away, so I had to do it twice. Silly me. You can just do that one time if you like. Then I snap the bone to the cursor and I resize it. For the next bone, I want the head of the bone to be at a nice pivot point. So I'm going to look at the other side of the mesh by holding down Control and then hitting numpad 3. And that gives me the opposite view. And I can see a vert in the middle there that I'm going to snap it to. But I don't want to snap to the surface. I'm constraining on the axes, so it's only matching that point. But you can see the bone is still in the center of our rig. I'm going to do the same thing to the tail of the bone. First, I'll snap the height vertically and then snap the position horizontally, but only on those two axes, so it is still in the middle of our rig. Next up, I'm extruding that bone from the top view, and I'm going to snap it to the vert in the middle of that pivot joint, also while constraining it along the world y-axis. Now there's two bones that I need to extrude here for the clamps, which I can constrain and find a nice vert in the middle of that joint. That's where it's going to pivot from. I do need another set of bones in the same place for those clamps, but I'll add those in a later step. I'm going to jump into local view with a /. Then I can duplicate one of the bones and snap it into place. I chose that one because it was already aligned with the world, so I can just snap it there and I don't need to rotate it or anything. I'll copy that bone and scale it down so it can be the widget override. And then I'll duplicate that bone one more time to be our open and our close control. So here is a good spot to pause and catch up if you haven't been following along. This is what the rig will look like at the moment. Bear in mind, I am missing one extra bone down here. And at the moment, we only have one side of our crane rig. Later on, I'm going to duplicate this side to the other, but we'll do that after we name our bones. So we have to do less naming. This bone here is in the middle at the moment, but I'm going to shift it over so it goes between 2 points there. Time to name some bones in this next step. The first bone I will name is the root. The one up from that is going to be the death base spin. And the two bones that run up the main section of the arms, they're going to be called the arm bones, but they are deformation bones. So they will get the name def arm _01 and def arm _02. The larger bone at the head of the crane is going to be our control, and I'm going to label that CTRL. I could have used the word control, it probably would have been better, but I just decided to use the shortened version. Now the little bone that's in the same spot, that's going to be the mechanism version of that. But it's also for the widget, it gets a mech at the start of the name and a widget on the end. The bone at the top, I'm going to call that close, even though it's opening and closing. That will be a good enough name. Now we do need two sets of bones here on the clamp sections, but I'm going to name them before I duplicate them. Clamp _1.L and clamp _2.L. Those ones get the .L because they're going to be symmetrized across to the other side. Now I can duplicate them, and I'll use the batch rename tool to add the DEF to the front, and then I can strip the digits and the punctuation off the end, which gets rid of the .001. So now I've just got an exploded view of all those bones so you can read the names more clearly. We've got the roof, the def base spin, the def arm 1, def arm 2. Then we have two sets of clamps, the def clamp 1.L, def clamp 2.L, and then these will be the control versions. Here is our control bone, the mechanism control widget, and our close bone. Now I've just exploded these bones so they're not over the top of each other. This is just so you can read the names. I do not want you to explode them like this. You will break your rig. Let's move on to creating our bone collections. I'm going to select all the def bones by selecting the pattern and then move them to a new collection with the M key, and I'm going to label that DEF. I'll do the same thing with all the mech bones and move them to a collection called MCH. The root bone, I'm just going to put that on a collection called root. And then everything else should already be on the default collection. So I'm just going to rename that one to be clamp. And if you spell all of these collections the same as me, when we run our script later on, it's going to work perfectly. But if you have a typo or you decide to call your collection something different, it's not going to actually work for you. But we'll get to that later in the video. Now it's time to symmetrize these bones across to the other side. So I'm just going to select them and then symmetrize. And that has halved my workload. Now's another good time to pause. So in that step, all we did was add the bones to the collections. So the root bone goes on the root. All of our mechanism bones go on the mechanism collection, all of the def bones go in the def collection, and then every other control bone is going to go on this collection called clamp. Now bear in mind I'm still missing one bone down here, but that's what I'm going to do in this very next step. Alright, so here is where I added that missing def bone to the base. It can be in the same spot as the root, so I'm just duplicating that bone and scaling it down, and then I'm going to call it DEF base, and move it to the def collection obviously. Then we need to turn off the deform option for all of the bones that won't be deforming our mesh. So I'm going to select all of our def bones first and then invert that selection with Control I. And then I will press Shift W and choose the deform here. And just out of habit, I always force the operator to disable that one. Now technically you don't need to do that in this instance, but it's kind of like that old adage, measure twice, cut once. If I take 2 seconds now, it can save me much more than 2 seconds later on when I'm trying to problem solve. We're now going to connect our geometry to the armature. I'll select the mesh, then the armature, and hit Control P. And I want to make sure I choose empty groups, and that's going to be the fastest way of working. And that option has added all of the groups that had deform enabled, but it hasn't weighted anything to them. I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So I will link select just by pressing L, and that's going to select all of the verts that are connected to where my mouse is. And I'll just grab all of the ones at the base and then assign them 100% to that base group. Then I'll do the similar thing with the base spin. I'll link select all of those parts. Although I did miss one section, see if you can spot which section I missed, but I will assign that to def base spin. Next is the bottom section of the crane arm, that is def arm 01. I will include the gray axle joint thing at the top, and then I'll just link select the next section, which is def crane 02. Now I'm looking around to see what else I should connect to this first clamp. And they're the bits that I've decided. So I'm going to assign that to def clamp 01.L. And then the gray parts on the end will be assigned to def clamp 02.L. Now I'll just do that to the other side. The first section is def clamp 01.R. And the last part is def clamp 02.R. So that is all of my weighting done. Now's a good time to pause and catch up. Although I did miss one bit of geometry, which you'll see me fix later. But maybe you didn't miss it when you did yours. All right, let's do the parenting now. So I will jump into edit mode. This def base bone is going to be parented to the root with the keep offset. The base spin bone is also going to be parented to the root with keep offset. The first crane section is going to be parented to that base spin, keep offset. And the crane arm 2 is already connected, so we can leave that as it is. Then I'll jump into local view because it's getting a little bit hard to see what I want to see. And I'll use my alt click to choose the bones that I want to select. So first I'm going to select the little widget bone and then the main control bone and parent those together. However, I'm going to change this later on. I'm going to parent the little widget straight to the crane arm 2, which is a better solution, but that's what I'm doing in this part of the video. The close bone will also be parented to the main control bone. And for the clamps, we want each one of those deformation bones to be parented to its control counterpart. So I'll use the alt-click menu again to select them in the correct order and parent the def bone to the control bone and do the same on the end. And then with that first clamp control, I should be parenting it to the widget bone, but I'm actually parenting it to the control bone. I will amend that little error later on, but I can symmetrize all of those changes across to the other side by selecting them and then just symmetrizing. So at the end of the step, this is an exploded view of what it should look like. However, I have included the final parenting here without my mistakes in it. The difference is we can parent the clamps to the widget bone. The closed bone can be parented to the widget bone as well. And this widget bone can be parented straight to this arm def bone. You can go ahead and copy this parenting so you don't need to do those little changes later on. We can now add the IK constraint to the end of the arm chain. So first we're going to select the target, which is the control bone, and then we select the owner, Control-Shift-C, and choose the IK constraint. Now this will technically work, but you'll see we have a few problems, and that is because we need to limit the chain length. So I'll select that constraint and then limit it to 2, which is what it should be, and that has solved our issue. Here's where I noticed the parenting mistake I made, and I need to parent the widget bone straight to the arm 2 bone. And that way our widget bone is always going to point back towards the target. And we also want the clamps to rotate as well. But before I change the parenting, I'm going to enable the X symmetry so that when I parent this clamp bone to the widget bone, it's going to do both sides at once. And that's it for the IK constraint, pretty easy, although I still haven't fixed all of the parenting yet. Can you spot the one bone that I've missed? Now I will add the tracking constraint, which is really the same thing that we did with the gun turret, but I'll select the target, that is the control bone, and then I will shift select the base spin, and I can add a locked track constraint. Now it's pointing in the wrong direction at first, but I can change it to track towards the -Y, and I don't need to touch anything else. We are done. And that is our tracking completed. Wasn't that quick? In the next step, we are going to be adding widgets to our rig here. And this is actually the final result of this next section, which you'll see in a moment. But I want to show you this before you actually undertake it, because I'm going to save you one of the steps that I do later. Because I want these clamps to rotate on the X-axis, I will change their rotation in edit mode. So the Z-axis is pointing forwards and the positive X is pointing down. I did that just by rotating them down 90 degrees. But I want you to make this change before you do the widgets, because then you won't have to adjust your widgets a second time like I did in the later part of the tutorial. But not to worry, let's get to the steps where I actually add these widget shapes. So obviously the root control will get a compass shape with just a few clicks. We only need shapes on the control bones, so none of the def or the mech bones. So the next one I'm going to add is the rectangle shape for the clamps. So I'll start with the plane shape and then adjust it from there. I'll slide it down the bone and then jump into the edit mode for the actual geometry just to scale it. Then once we're done, we can jump back and click the button to copy that across to the other side. And I will do the same thing on the other clamp. For the large control widget, to save you some time, I've already gone ahead and created it. I will add that manually to the bone there. And then I'm just giving my rig a little bit of a test before I move the closed bone closer to better match the widget that I've already made. Next, I'm going to override the display of the widget so that stays aligned with the rest of the geometry. So I'll just override the display with that widget bone there. Now I can finally see that I should have parented the closed bone to the widget bone so that it rotates with the rest of its friends. So that's what I do now before giving it another test. Now I don't know why the control bone lost its parent, but it should be actually parented to the root. So I fixed that here. And then I also find the missing weights on that section of geometry. So I just select that and then add it to the base spin group, which is where it should have been earlier. And the only widget bone I'm missing is for the closed bone. So I'll just add a circle shape to that one. And once I've got the circle shape, I want to find the final position for that bone in edit mode. And I decided that I wanted a round number of -1. That looks like a good place to put it. But putting it there broke my nice widget. So I just needed to edit the shape one more time to make it a little bit wider. And now it fits nicely. Time to color our bones. So the root bone can get a red color. The big control is going to be yellow. I'll make the closed control green, although it is hard to see. Another color perhaps would have been better. And all the clamps, I'm just going to make orange for now. All right, so now's a good time to pause and catch up. This is what it looks like at the end of this step. We've just colored all of our bones and given them widgets. Bear in mind, this version here that you're looking at doesn't have these controls spun around. So as I said at the start of this section, it's better if you rotate this one 90 degrees. So they're rotating on the X axis when they're actually being animated. But if you hadn't done that before adding the widgets, you won't need to adjust them later like I do in one of the later sections. In this step, we're going to lock any of the channels that we're not going to use. That way, when an animator adds keyframes to their whole rig, it's not going to add a bunch of useless information. So we know that the animator is not going to touch any of our def or our mech bones. So I'm going to solo those collections so I can select them all and then hold down Alt and lock absolutely everything. Then I will solo all of the other collections which hold the controls. I'm going to select everything and change them over to be Euler XYZ while holding Alt, and that has gotten rid of my quaternion rotations on all of my controls. Now with the clamps, I want to lock all of the channels except the X rotation, but here is where I realize I should have rotated the bones so the X axis matched the main movement. So I decide I'll move on for now and I'll come back to that in just a second. With our control bone, we want that to only be able to translate, so we'll lock the rotation and the scale. And with the little close control, we only want that to be moving on the X location. So I'm going to lock every other channel. And now I come back to those clamps and I rotate the bone roll in edit mode so that the Z is pointing forwards and the X is down. Hopefully you've already done that, so you don't need to do that step, as well as fix the widgets here. Because I rotated those bones, my widgets are wrong, so I just have to amend that. But after making those adjustments, I lock everything except the X rotation. Then I make it clap like a seal. And the last little thing I do is add a limit location constraint that targets the X location. So it's limiting it between 0 and 2. So now is an excellent time to pause and catch up. At the end of that step, you should have a rig that looks something like this. Basically, we have locked all of the channels that each component is not going to use. And in that step, I did rotate these controls here, but hopefully you've already done that, so you didn't need to adjust that in this step. Plus, I have also added the limit constraint on our close control up here. But as you can see, nothing is connected yet. In the next step, we're going to connect that to some animation. All right, so I'm going to add some animation so that we can control the opening and closing of our claw by moving this control up the top here. So let's give myself a little bit more room to animate. I'm going to create a horizontal split here. Then I'll make this the action editor, just so that we can see. And then I just need to add some keyframes. So I'm going to select all of my bones here. And then I want to keyframe the rotation, but I will enable a keying set. I'll turn on rotation, and let's just turn on this. So on frame 1, I'm going to hit I. Then I'll go to frame 10, which is 9 frames later. I want to animate, let's just say 10 degrees. That'll do. Let's keyframe that. I'll copy that with Control C and paste it with Control Shift C. That's pasted it over the other side. I'll keyframe them as well so they don't move when I don't want. And then on frame 21, I'm going to animate these ones. What do we want? Let's just go a nice 85 degrees so that it's kind of looking like a claw. I'll copy that, paste it to the other side, and then also keyframe that one and that one just by hitting I, so I know that it doesn't move. So there we go, that's our animation. But I will change the interpolation type over to be linear. That's because we don't want any slow in or out for this automation. We want it to be a 1-to-1 mapping to the movement of the control. If we leave it at the default behavior, which is Bezier, the movement won't exactly match what the animator wants to do. Now, if that doesn't exactly make sense to you right now, don't worry. All you need to know is that we want these animation curves to be straight or linear. So I'm pressing T to bring up that interpolation type menu. Okay, so that's my animation. Actually, I will name it. So crane arm open close. I'll hit the shield so it doesn't go missing when I disconnect it. And I just need to remember where it started and where it ended. So it started on frame 1 and it ended on frame 21. So let's just go back to the start and clear this now. It is safe. We're not going to lose it because I clicked that shield. And now I want to connect it to the movement of our close control up here. So I'm going to select the target and then just do one bone first and then copy that across to the other bones. So I want to add our constraint on this one here. Control Shift C, choose action. Here's the action constraint over here. You can see it's targeting the close bone. The first thing I want to tell it to use is the action that we created. So open close. It was starting on frame 1 and ending on frame 21. And then what is it going to target? It is going to be the X location of our control up here. So that is correct. But our space needs to be a local space. And what was the minimum and the maximum? The minimum was 0 and the maximum was 2. Now when I move this, it should play that animation. Awesome. I don't want to actually manually do that to all of the other controls. So let's just select the other ones we want to copy to, and then select that one last. and then go pose, constraints, copy constraints to selected bones. And now when we move this, you'll see our animation is playing. Awesome, hey? Okay, last thing we're going to do is tidy up our view so we can turn off our wireframe. We don't need to see that anymore. Let's get rid of our axes and in front. And we're going to do one more tidy up thing. That would be add this rig to 2 spots at once. So we're going to go over to the object tab under collections. Oh, actually we need to be in object mode. Add to collection, crane rig. Now that is in 2 spots. And we're officially going to say that this part of the tutorial is over. But as an added extra to kind of extend your learning, I have included in the file a UI script. So all we need to do to get this running is to add in a custom property that matches this setting up here. And this will give us some fancy controls that show up on the side. Well, they're not really that fancy, but we'll have some buttons that show up in our viewport. But you will need to make sure that everything matches. So we need to make sure that we spell everything correctly. So rig ID and this here. And as long as our collection names are the same as what I've got here, when you run this script, it should work. Okay, so how do we do that? We are going to jump over into the data tab. That is the green stick man. Down the bottom, we're going to hit new and then change this property over to a string. And then the property name, this needs to match. It's going to be rig underscore ID, all in lowercase. And then our default value, we're going to write crane underscore arm underscore rig, all in lowercase. And we don't need to override this because the animator won't need to change it. We can just click OK. Now we're not quite done. By default, Blender will leave it at the value that it was already set, which was 1.0. We can hit backspace to reset it to the default value that we just told it that it should be. And now that rig ID name matches, and we can just run the script. So we can just click in here and go run. When we jump back in here and we're in pose mode, we should see these buttons show up. And what do? They turn on and off our layers. And we are done. So have a little play around with your rig, and I hope it brings a smile to your face. And also I hope you learnt a bunch, and I really look forward to seeing the work that you do.